thank y'all for having me. This is a very special place to me. I've been a member of this church since I was 5 years old when my family moved here from Houston. My mother is Nancy Dunlap, and my father is the late Rodney Dunlap. And this place has a very, very special place in my heart. So I'm very honored to be able to speak with you guys today and share something that is so deep in my heart. People think I'm crazy because I love hospice so much. And I'll tell you, people get called to this work not because they want to, I think it's truly because you have a story to tell. I think you have your own hospice experience, and that's what draws you to that work. Mine was back in 2009 when my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 adenocarcinoma, infiltrated the bone. He was so incredibly sick. And his battle was short. It was so courageous. He did go on hospice, but it was for a very, very short time. And I can't help but wonder, looking back on it now, if I knew then what I knew now, could his story been a little bit different? Could his hospice experience been just a hair bit different? Could we have made that better for him? Not that it was horrible, but it was short. I mean, it was 24 hours, and that was hard. That's hard on the family, and it's very hard on the patient. So I hope that, if anything, if you get out of this tonight, I hope that you will learn that hospice is not anything to be afraid of. It's actually a gift. It's absolutely one of the most underutilized benefits that Medicare provides every single one of us, and it's completely underutilized. So I want this to be interactive. I hope that y'all will ask questions, share your stories, let me know. I mean, it's not gonna bother me to interrupt, so let's just get right on into it. Oh, wait, yeah, okay. So the hospice philosophy, guys, I mean, this is just a bunch of, I'm gonna get down to the meat of it, but hospice affirms life and focuses on quality of life, quality over quantity, basically. Hospice exists to provide support and care for people in the last phases of an incurable illness so that they might live as fully and comfortably as possible. It neither hastens nor postpones death, and I think that is a huge misconception that so many people have about hospice, that as soon as someone comes on hospice, it's just gonna speed right up, and we're just gonna give you that first injection of morphine and you're done, and that's not necessarily the case, so we're gonna fix that. Hospice exists in the belief that through appropriate care and the support of caring community sensitive to their desires, patients will receive the mental and the spiritual preparation for death that meets their needs. Hospice mission statement is to provide compassionate end-of-life care for patients and families through clinical excellence and uncompromising service. So what is hospice? Who knows what, I mean, someone give me their definition of what hospice means to you.
Care for people at the end of their lives.
Absolutely.
And the families.
Absolutely, and that's very important, and we will definitely touch on that. The family is just as important as that patient, as you support that family through one of the most critical, most heartbreaking times that they will go through.
I think that third bullet is really, it improves the quality of their life. It's not going to cure anything, but it can make things so much better. My dad had longer than 24 hours, but not much longer. He had about 3 days. And I'm like you, if we'd known then what we know now, we would have made a phone call way sooner.
And I agree with that. And that's something that Mom and I still talk about today. What could we have done differently? Because I think deep down we knew that Daddy didn't really want to fight. He was fighting for us, and his battle was 60 days from literally the day of his diagnosis. So it was tough, definitely tough. So let's just start. It's a form of care provided for those experiencing life-limiting illnesses, and we're going to go through what all those different diagnoses can be, because there are so many of them that we'll talk about. It focuses on palliative care rather than curative. So when a patient chooses hospice, they are truly choosing comfort over curative. You've got to be in the mindset that all of your treatment options, they're exhausted, and that you've got to be in the mindset that you're ready for comfort care. It's about symptom management. And when I say symptoms, it's things like pain, it's shortness of breath, it's anxiety, it's nausea, vomiting, swelling, anything that causes a patient discomfort day in and day out. Hospice manages that with medications. And we meet those patients where they are. The goal is not to snow them out, let them lay in a bed and let that be it. I mean, it truly is about meeting those patients where they are, layering those medications little by little until the patient is at a level of comfort. True story. This is a true story. When I started back with Kindred in 2011, part of the training process was to go ride with all of the different disciplines. And so I got to experience an admission on a little old man. And he got in his bed, his hospital bed, and he truly was very, very sick, very frail. I can still see him in my head. And he just got very comfortable in the bed, and he laid his little hands, and he said, just let me, to the nurse, just let me know when you're gonna give it to me. And she said, well, give you what? The shot to make me go. Like, you need to let me know. And we're like, oh my gosh, you've been so, you don't know. I mean, it's like that's part of that misconception that it's not to, yeah. It improves the quality of life for a terminally ill patient and also for the family. And we're going to talk about how truly important that family support is. Hospice use a holistic approach, which encompasses the medical, social, emotional, and spiritual aspect of a person's well-being. And it's provided by a team, a very qualified, amazing team. So back in my day, whenever Daddy went on hospice, I was clueless about what all hospice would do, and I honestly thought that cancer was the only diagnosis that a patient could go on hospice for. I mean, it was very, maybe I just wasn't aware, but as you can see, there are so many different diagnoses that Medicare recognizes for a patient to be eligible for hospice. COPD, cancer, congestive heart failure, ALS, one of the worst deaths, just horrible. Dementia and Alzheimer's, AIDS, believe it or not, it's here, and there's lots of patients on hospice that have AIDS. Renal disease, debility, and stroke and coma. In today's world with Medicare, there are so many what they call ICD-10 codes, where one of these has got to really be your underlier, but having comorbidities will help support, and all these, trillions of codes that will help support and bring a patient on hospice if they can't come to a clear, true, pinpoint diagnosis and they need supporting documentation. So just because maybe one of these isn't dominant doesn't mean that you don't qualify. There's just a lot that goes into it, and you'll be qualified. So let's talk about some of the misconceptions. To be eligible for hospice, a person has to be in the final stages of dying. Well, we've clearly said that that's not true. That's definitely a misconception. It's just for the elderly. How many people do we know that are young that have been on hospice before? Probably more than we want to talk about, actually. Probably one of the hardest ones I ever saw was a young man with a glioblastoma who was 38 years old and had the most beautiful family with 3 beautiful little girls. And it was the most heartbreaking thing in the world, and he took it like a champ. And hospice provided him the most beautiful death you've ever seen. It was absolutely amazing. So happens in all ages, for sure. It's not about giving up hope. Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that you've given up. It means that you're just ready for comfort. It means that you're ready to say, I'm tired, and it's okay, and it's okay for that. It's only for cancer patients. Well, that was my misconception. I've learned lots about that. And the Medicare hospice benefit covers only 6 months of care. So it touches on this in just a little bit, but that seems to be, well, if the patient comes on hospice, they can only have 6 months to live. Clarification, a physician has to say that in their best interest, in their best knowledge, that if a patient were to no longer seek aggressive treatment, would they be surprised if that patient died in 6 months or less? That is what qualifies a patient for hospice. A physician has to be the one to say. It doesn't mean that if the 6th month ends and they're still alive, that we kick them off. As long as a patient still meets the criteria and eligibility that Medicare deems per specific disease type, they can stay on hospice until their journey is over. And if you choose hospice, you can never see your family physician again. This is another really big misconception that we will talk about as well, but I'll just go ahead and touch on it. As a patient and a family, that patient has the right to ask their attending physician to continue to follow them under hospice care. Doesn't mean that the physician is going to say yes, but it does mean that the physician, that family has the right to say, we want Dr. John Doe to continue our care. Will y'all see if that is okay? If he is in agreement, then you can continue to have that attending physician in partnership with a hospice medical director that will work together to manage your pain and symptoms. Now, in my experience over 12 years, a lot of the times the physicians will say, we'll continue to be their attending physician, but let's turn the pain and symptom management over to those hospice medical directors because they're the experts at what they do. They're the ones who can manage that pain and symptoms like no other. So, questions, anyone so far? Okay. Admission criteria. Patient, like we talked about, must have a terminal disease with 6 months or less of life expectancy. Has to be certified by a physician, not one but two, our medical director and the referring physician. Patient and or physician must agree that palliative, not curative, is appropriate for the patient. And the patient and or the family wants hospice and agrees that it is the appropriate type of care for them and for their loved one. It breaks my heart when we visit with families and the patient wants so bad to be on service and the family bites it or is not supportive of the patient's decisions or their willingness to want to come on, or even vice versa when the patient is not really ready there, but the family is the one that's pushing. It's very hard. It's a struggle sometimes. It's hard to let go of those that you love and that you see are terminal, but that's where some other team members come in. There are 4 levels of care that are a part of hospice care. One of them is what we call routine home care. That is anywhere that you call home. If you live at your house, if you're living in a nursing home, if you're living in an assisted living, wherever your residence is, that's called routine home care, and that is where it's the basic level of care under the hospice benefit. Level 2 is continuous care, and this is a really, it doesn't happen very, very often because it requires so much, it's very taxing on the staff and it requires a lot of additional documentation, but as you can see, it requires that a nurse or a hospice aide will have to remain in the patient's home for 8 to 24 hours at a time, documenting because the patient's symptoms can't get managed. If they are thrashing in pain, if they are agitated, they're having terminal agitations, and it doesn't matter how much you're medicating them, they just can't get comfortable. This is when continuous care comes in. It doesn't happen very often. In fact, I think in my 12 years, I've seen it once, and it was actually with a Johnson Street member. It was the most heartbreaking thing. But it was, it's very short term, and the documentation has to be there for Medicare to say, we'll reimburse you for this, because you do get paid more, which. Okay, general inpatient. That is another level of care that typically happens in a hospital setting. General inpatient, it's when patients have short-term symptoms that are so severe that they cannot be managed at home. Same thing. If you've got thrashing pain, if you've got pain in the hospital when a patient's been admitted and they're trying to discharge on hospice, but they can't seem to get that patient comfortable before they head home or when they're discharged, they may ask us to do what we call a GIP, or a general inpatient evaluation on a patient, to see if we can manage that right there at the hospital. Some cases, they can stay right there and pass comfortably there. Other times, it can change by the minute. Once that gets comfortable and the symptoms that are being managed can be done right there in the home setting, Medicare is going to say, you've got to get them home. This is expensive for Medicare, and by all means, you don't want to be bad stewards of Medicare dollars. So this one does happen, but not as often as continuous care. And then respite care is such a blessing. I have to tell you, it's intended for the family. It's intended for caregiver relief. So when you have a patient that is in the home setting, that lives at home, and you've got adult children who care for the patient at home, it allows for a patient to go into a long-term care facility of that patient and family's choice for up to 5 days at a time, and hospice covers that. It can be used for, just because the caregivers need to sleep. They need a break. They need some time to take care of business. They need to go to a wedding out of town, or they want to go on a vacation with their family. That gives them 5 days a month that they can go into a long-term care facility. The team goes to that long-term care facility, assumes care. On that very next midnight, the patient is transferred home and care resumes at home. It is huge. Very big part of hospice. So it takes a team to love on these patients and to make sure that they're receiving the best care. The center of that team is definitely the patient and the family, but as you can see, it's from a physician, a nurse, hospice aide, a social worker, chaplain, and volunteer. I'll tell you up front, when a patient comes on hospice, this is the way it should be. You drive the bus. It's your plan of care, and every patient's plan of care is different. It is custom to that individual patient. So when a patient comes on, if you don't want to use 6 members of this team coming into your home, you certainly don't have to, but you can utilize as little as you want or as much as you want. The more you use, the better care you're going to get, and it's going to be better for those caregivers in the house, and good for the patient. Not only that, it allows for extra eyes that get to come in and take a look at that patient and see what's going on day in and day out, so that we can communicate as a team and find out, if the aide goes in and sees that the patient's having a bad day, really hurting, maybe fell and had a skin tear, we can communicate that very routine, having all those eyes that are in the home, checking on that patient more regularly. Physician team, we talked about having the attending physician and your medical director. Medical director, we have access to 24/7. So as patients decline, as symptoms arise, symptoms exacerbate, we have access to those physicians to change any orders that we need to on medications. And believe me, it happens on Christmas Day, it happens at 2 in the morning. I mean, it's such a blessing and peace of mind to the family knowing that hospice is a phone call away and there's a doctor that is ready to take our call if in fact you have, if there's a need that arises with that patient. Attending physicians, like we said, it can be anyone that's your family practice or your internal medicine doctors that agree to stay on as that attending physician. 10 out of 10 times, your specialists are not going to stay on as an attending. Once you select hospice care, thank you. So not in a bad way. They're done. I mean, if you're not going to them to receive care any longer, then there's no need for them to continue to see you. If you have an attending physician that stays on service, that gives you the ability in Medicare's eyes that you can continue to go back and see your attending physician if you feel like it. Medicare will still pay for that. It's not considered a conflict of interest or as if you're seeking aggressive treatment. Does that make sense? Yeah. Case managers or your RNs, your nurses, probably one of the most important members of your team because they are the eyes and the ears for the physician. They are the ones that come in. They're on call 24/7, and I'll speak on behalf of our team. We have nurses all week long that are RN case managers, and then we have a separate on-call team that comes in at 5 o'clock in the evening, and it's a completely separate team, and then they're back, until the early morning, until our RN case managers come back. It's fresh eyes, it's fresh hands, it's fresh minds that are caring for those patients through the hours, throughout the night, if you need that extra help. But those case managers, their number one goal is to come in the home and to assess for pain and symptom management. Ask that patient, are you having pain? Are you having nausea? What can we do different? What can we fix for you today? What can we do to make you feel better? It's a full assessment every single time. They're experts in pain management and symptom control, and they provide education to the patients and the families on the disease process. These nurses are trained to be able to tell you when a patient is declining and why they are declining and what to expect. And if you've ever been in the position where you've had a loved one on hospice, you're absolutely terrified because you don't know what's happening day in and day out and why they're changing and why this is happening and why they start turning this color or, it can be very scary. So it's wonderful to have a team that can educate the family on what to expect when the patient is starting to decline. And it provides visits based on an individual patient needs. For us, our standard is 2 times a week, up to 3 times a week on a nurse. Those are scheduled visits. If you need more, it's a phone call away. Hospice is 24/7. I mean, you should never have a problem contacting your hospice to have a visit if you have questions or concerns or you need a nurse there to oversee what's going on with your loved one in the home if something doesn't look right or feel right. Hospice aides are the unsung heroes, in my opinion. They become so personal. They develop a relationship with our patients that it's pretty special. They help with bathing. They shampoo hair. They paint fingernails. They put lipstick on a patient so that they feel good on the outside. They make sure their clothes are clean. They take out trash. They anything that patient needs personal care-wise, that's what those aides are for. Typically, an aide will come in 3 days a week. It can be more if you need it because, again, it's based on that patient's needs, on their plan of care. What we find so often is more than 3 times a week becomes so taxing on the patient. It's hard for them to move, to have to get up and get into a shower or be wheelchaired into the shower or even bed baths. So that plan of care can change on a daily basis just depending on how that patient is actually doing. Social workers, in my opinion, they're twofold. They're amazing about doing a psychosocial assessment. They have to do that by Medicare guidelines within the first 5 days to assess any needs that are in the home. Do you need help with a do not resuscitate? Do you understand what a do not resuscitate is? And would you like to have that in place? I will tell you that is a misconception of hospice, that you don't have to have a do not resuscitate to go on hospice. It's a right of a family. We will educate all day long because we know how important it is, but some of these families have to take baby steps when it's, they're already taking the leap to end curative care and have comfort measures. We don't want to not have a DNR as well. So it's constant education with our families. I will tell you, 9.5 out of 10 always have a DNR. It's that important. Social workers are also on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're the ones who also provide your respite care and long-term care placement. So if things get too tough in the home, if the patient is declining and they need a higher level of care than what can be provided in the home, your social worker is that liaison between the hospice team and the patient in any long-term care facility to make sure that they are getting that set up appropriate. They're doing all the legwork for you. Y'all, that's the last thing y'all want to deal with is going to talk about nursing homes. You've got a declining loved one, so utilize the social workers for sure. It also provides counseling for patients and families. Sometimes it's just a bright face that wants to come in and love on that patient and pray with them and love on them a little bit. Sometimes they don't have the needs of do you need help with a medical power of attorney or a durable power of attorney? I mean, those are all things that social workers can take care of. Community resources. Do you need Meals on Wheels? Do you need help filling out Medicaid paperwork? I mean, what a job. Has anyone ever had to fill that mess out before? Lord have mercy. It is pitiful. It's awful. It's a process for sure. But social workers, they are educated in being able to take on those tasks and help guide you and walk you through those processes so that if you need it for long-term care or whatever the next level is, it's done and it's taken care of. Spiritual care coordinators and bereavement coordinators. Spiritual care coordinators, they offer the care from a non-denominational perspective. I think it is so important to have that additional spiritual care. And we hear so often from patients who will come in and say, well, I've already got my own chaplain. I've already got my own preacher that comes to see me. And so sometimes they don't want anyone to come in and pray with them. And I think you can never have too much. Come on, let them come on in and love on you a little bit and pray with you. But you know what, it's the patient's choice for sure. But spiritual care coordinators are there to offer support not only to that patient, but to the family that's struggling, because every family is different, for sure. You never know what's pulling at their heart and what issues need to be resolved within families. You'd be surprised about some of that. Bereavement services are provided for up to 13 months following a patient's death. It's grief counseling. It's allowing someone to come in and help you with that grief support. 13 months is just a number that Medicare throws out there. It's to help you get through all those first Father's Day, first Mother's Day, Christmas, birthdays. It can extend as long as you need it, but Medicare says it's got to be offered to you up to 13 months. The family receives grief support and education during that time. A lot of the times when families have when they're grieving early and they're just struggling so hard with the decision that a patient had to come on hospice, their loved one had to come on hospice, we'll start pre-bereavement. We assess those needs, and it's discussed weekly in what we call an IDG, or an interdisciplinary group, so that we got to start loving on them ahead of time and start helping them understand what's happening. So pre-bereavement for sure. We also offer support groups as a means of educating and supporting those who are grieving, and we can recommend other other grief groups that are out there. Grief Share is another one. There's different churches that offer some support groups as well. Anyone have questions so far? Okay. One of my favorite parts of a hospice team is a volunteer. I think it takes a special person to be able to give up some time of theirs to love on patients who are terminal and at the end of life. They offer patient support. They make visits to the patients and families. It may be that the loved one in the home, the caregiver, needs to go get a haircut, go run to the bank and pick up prescriptions and do some things for themselves. A volunteer can be set up so that they can come sit with that patient at the home and allow that caregiver to go take care of some personal business that they need to do. It's not something you can just call immediately and set up. We need, typically some time to make sure that a volunteer is available to be at the home, but it's a blessing to have that volunteer as a part of that team. They make crafts for our patients. I know for us, we take flowers. We have a local florist who donates flowers to us every month, and we take bud vases to our patients in the facilities and assisted livings. It's awesome. We also have ladies who give up their Mondays to give haircuts to patients who need to feel good on the outside, and they can't get out to get their hair cut. And how special is that someone comes in the home and gets in the bed with them and is able to cut their hair and let them have some dignity still. It's pretty incredible. Hospice volunteers are something that we always need. I'm just going to throw that out there. If it's something that your heart is called to do, there's a process to become a volunteer. It's not anything crazy. We just have some paperwork, and you have to get a TB test. Just to make sure that you're cool and all that. But to make sure you're healthy. That's what I meant. But not sick with TB. But what a blessing it is, absolutely, to have to be a part of that hospice family and to be able to go in and love on those patients. This does not happen very often, but we have to talk about it. I'll just tell you, occupational, physical, and speech therapy in the world, it's considered aggressive treatment. It's considered getting extra care, extra help, and it really is against the hospice philosophy of what hospice truly is about. There are times, though, that when it comes for safety issues in a home, that we will do very limited physical therapy or occupational therapy. When we contract with companies, the patient gets like 5 or 6 visits, and we have to document that there's a goal and a purpose. It's not because they want to build their strength. It has to be for something like safety in the home, helping them transfer from the bed to the wheelchair or to the shower bench or something like that. It's limited, but I think it's a misconception that you can't have just full-blown physical therapy coming out like home health. It's completely different. So when a patient comes on hospice, part of their hospice benefit is that they receive durable medical equipment, or what we refer to as DME. What I love about it is that you can need part of this today, and 6 weeks from now you could need more. And it's a matter of a phone call away, but it's such a help to have all this equipment that is available to a patient as a part of the hospice benefit, so they're able to make things more comfortable at home for themselves, so that the families can it may be easier for the patients to care, their loved ones to care for them at the home. A hospital bed, oxygen, wheelchair, bedside commode, nebulizers, diapers and underpads, wound care, anything that would help make life more comfortable for that patient at home and easier for care. It's a part of their hospice benefit. I will tell you, lift chairs and electric scooters are not included. I get asked about lift chairs all the time. No, ma'am. No, ma'am. They are not. So So another part of the hospice benefit is the medications that you receive. Hospice covers any of the medications that relate to the hospice diagnosis for that terminal illness, as well as pain and symptom management. So not only your pain meds, but medications for swelling, for nausea, for anxiety, for swelling, for constipation, for anything that's causing a patient discomfort in the home, we're going to cover those medications. We're going to talk about how all this is paid for, because you're probably going, holy cow. Medicare, there's a hospice benefit that was created back in 1983 under Medicare Part A, and it covers all of your care 100%. So you get the team, you get your nurses, the aides, the social worker, the bereavement care, you get all the equipment, your medications and supplies 100% covered by your Medicare Part A.
What about your young patients?
A lot of them have private insurance for that. Great question. If they have a private insurance policy, we'll run that. 9.5 out of 10 times they have a hospice benefit under that policy, and we'll run it there as well. We also take non-funded patients for those that don't have care, or maybe they haven't met their deductible yet, and it's going to be a daily. We can't. So we'll take a patient non-funded as well to be able to care for them. So Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance. I've never had a patient self-pay in 12 years. I mean, it's there, but we'd rather just say, let us take care of you non-funded. That's hard. Well, I'm not going to sit here and tout my company the whole time, but I do work for a pretty amazing company. I want to know what questions you have about hospice care, about maybe, or a story that you have about maybe a loved one that was on hospice, if you want to share.
What other kind of are there other hospice companies?
Yes, there's like 8 in San Angelo, yes. And they all do amazing work. They all offer the same things. We've got one that's a nonprofit that still accepts the same type of funding as all the for-profit hospices do. So yes, there's 8 different companies that they're...
So if you're in the hospital and you're trying to choose, will the hospital push theirs?
Today they do, but they're supposed to give what they call a choice letter, provide you a choice letter, Scott, so that they can, you can pick which hospice that you want.
Gotcha.
And then they would send that referral to the company of the choice, and then we would consult with the family, answer any questions. A physician can make that referral as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be from the hospital, so it can be a private, an attending physician. It can be a nursing home that we hear from that can call and make the referral, and assisted living. I mean, you can call yourself and say, I think it's time, I want to talk about hospice care, I need help. And then we do the legwork to get the orders and all of that good stuff, medical records, to start the admission process. And the goal is to admit same day. That's the goal.
Have you seen instances where people go on to hospice and then things happen, and maybe because the pain is taken away, they are able to...
Every single month. We discharge patients every single month because they no longer meet criteria that Medicare deems makes them eligible. When they start to improve, and we do research periods, and we're documenting every single day, every week. So when we meet weekly in our interdisciplinary group, it includes our medical director, the nurses, the aides, the social worker. I mean, it's the entire team there. When we start finding that they no longer meet eligibility and they're improving, we definitely will, and we celebrate that. Like, it's awesome when they get to come off hospice, but know that their hospice benefit never runs out. Like your skilled days in a nursing home, or that you get so many, and that's it. With hospice, your benefit never ends until the patient passes away. So you can come on and come off, and Yes, ma'am.
My nurse one, Mom was on Kindred, and I remember the day that the nurse, which was absolutely an angel to our family and to her, told us it was 6 months or less. And I pulled her aside later and I said, what am I looking for? And she wanted to be through the next 6 months, and it happened to happen within 4. But she walked me through that and was there every step with us. And she truly was a phone call.
Yes, she was. Thank you. Wilma was so dear to our whole entire team. Thank you for letting us care for her.
I think that's one of the interesting things. I was a hospice chaplain for a year, and the team really takes ownership of each patient. When she talks about those 6 people, and they get every week they meet and talk about every single patient with the medical director. And the stories that everybody's telling are just amazing. And when it gets to the day where there's a funeral, almost the entire team is there because they have been so in love with that person during that time, no matter how long it was. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's just the challenge for the spiritual care for the chaplains that do bereavement and spiritual care is legally and ethically they're not allowed to proselytize. But their job is to try to help someone face their death in a way that they find comfort from whatever position of faith they come from. So I had everything from Wiccans to agnostics to you name it. And my job was to find a connection with where they were, their system of belief, and help them face death well. And boy, that's hard when you're sitting there going, I got the answer. It's Jesus, you know. But the other thing is there's so many people that are Christ followers that are facing death, and they might be able to sit there and tell you, I know what grace is, but they're scared out of their mind because in the back of their mind they're still thinking works, and they're still thinking, I haven't done enough, God's not going to let me in. And so you're trying to help figure out what it is they believe and help them walk from that point into. So that's where your team comes in also, because they start talking to them about those same things, helping out the chaplain. And so a lot of times we did team visits where the chaplain would go with the social worker or with a nurse or what have you, and it was really a great process. But it's an incredible thing. I do think it's ironic that you said that, you know, you're not the Grim Reaper, but you're dressed all black.
Truth be told, I dumped tea on my lap coming in, my white pants coming in from Brownwood today. So I was like, dadgummit. So I do love that. This is not intentional. You'd be surprised though, whenever people think hospice is just has such a negative connotation, just such an ugly reputation. And there's nothing more rewarding than to hear a family say, we wish that we would have done this sooner. We wish that we would have brought mom on sooner or dad on sooner because of the benefit and how much it did for them and for their family, and to see that patient be comfortable.
Well,
so
the family doesn't realize how much they're doing until hospice comes in.
You're exactly right.
Oh my goodness, I don't have to get him in and out of the bathtub.
It takes that burden off of that family where they can just be the spouse or be the adult child that's loving on them. Absolutely. And the peace of mind of knowing that hospice is a phone call away gives that family such peace as well.
I want to make a big commercial push for that volunteer part that she talked about, because I saw volunteers do amazing things. The holidays are coming up, right? How many families, when they're faced with all this, are thinking anything about putting out a tree or any kind of decoration or anything like that? They're not. But you know what would happen is our volunteers would show up at a house and transform a house, and the families just blown away, not realizing how much comfort they received because somebody just stuck up a small tree. You know, something they weren't going to be able to do because they were so stressed and overwhelmed. Or I had a patient who lived in a mobile home, and I went to see her one day, and she kind of yelled through the door saying, "You're going to have to just kick the door in or something." And I was like, "What in the world?" Well, she had been trapped on one side of her house because the floor of the hallway had collapsed. And so she couldn't get, so the first thing I did is call the social worker, and they start getting adult protective services out, check things out, make sure things are happening. And then I called our volunteer coordinator, and she dispatched a group of volunteers that within 2 hours we had a whole new floor in that place. And that was an amazing thing that was offered. But volunteers do so many incredible things. And guys, if you got any time at all to offer toward hospice, whether it's this organization or one of the other 7, I really encourage you to give that time because it blesses families like you would not believe.
You had mentioned early at the beginning about if they're in assisted living or full care or whatever, that how does hospice work with that when they're already in a facility that provides care?
Excellent question. So we don't take away from anything that they do. We actually enhance that care. 2 things I want to say about that. It's just added. It's just added caregivers that are in the home or in that assisted living. When a patient goes on hospice in an assisted living or a long-term care facility, we drive the plan of care though. So it's our orders, it's our, kind of what we're doing, but we don't take away from anything, it's just added. A lot of the times those facilities are so grateful because they're so understaffed so often, and knowing that your loved one has their very own aide that comes out 3 days a week to provide that personal care to them, and maybe 2 or 3 other patients in that building throughout the week. They're getting that specialized care. It's more one-on-one. Again, we would never want to take away. Some facilities offer levels of care where they charge you for the baths and they charge you for, some of these different things. It actually helps financially with the families too, because if we're coming in and providing baths 3 days a week, that's one less thing that med tech or the personal care attendant at an assisted living is having to do, and they can remove that level of care, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I will tell you too, on a side note, I have found that when a patient is on hospice in a facility, it kind of steps up their care just a hair bit too, and they're being held accountable by a hospice team that is in there quite regularly monitoring. There's nothing worse than going into a patient's room and they are saturated in a wet urine diaper or full of poop or whatever it is, and their clothes haven't been changed, and they're going to get called out for that kind of, they're going to call them out, and no one wants to be held accountable. You want to be on your game, basically, is what it is. So it really kind of improves the level, improves the care when those patients are on hospice in a facility. And it's a benefit that you've either paid into or you're paying into now. It's there for all of us. It's going to be there, whether you use it or not. It's a Medicare it's a benefit that is created in Medicare Part A. We all have it, or will when you turn 65. Yes, sir. Well, it's a bereavement camp for kids. Our site does not offer it anymore. 2 of the camps are out of state, but we called ours something a little different. I can't remember what it was. But Camp Braveheart is a bereavement for kids when they've got parents who've lost their loved ones and need that extra grief support. Anyone else? Tell me, girl.
Delaine, I've heard in other states, and I'm sure maybe we have them here too, but hospice houses.
Yes.
Where the patient goes directly to this hospice house. Do you have any knowledge of maybe they're over-medicating patients to keep them quiet and...
I don't have that knowledge, and I would hope to heaven that they're not doing that, to be quite honest with you. The benefit of an inpatient or what they call a hospice house or it's an IPU or an inpatient unit is what those are called. In fact, Shannon South is about to get one as they're partnering with Hospice of San Angelo their whole 3rd floor is going to be an IPU or a hospice unit. The goal is for those patients to be able to die there at the facility and not at home. It doesn't mean that they've got a higher level of care. They need that higher level care in an IPU, but they're just receiving that care in that unit as opposed to in their home or a long-term care facility. Having a patient die at home is very hard for some people. It's that constant walking in the door and seeing the hospital bed or that memory of that loved one being in that home. It's hard for some people, and they don't want their loved one to die at home. We hear it so often. So that isn't I mean, I have not heard of anyone over-medicating to, and I would hope not. That's not the goal of it, at least. Anyone else? Are we good? All right, thank y'all.